Hey viewers, it's been a little over 2 months since Starfield launched, and I think the honeymoon phase is ending. Public opinion on the game is starting to become more negative as time rolls on. I doubt that Starfield is receiving as warm a reception as Bethesda imagined it would, but it's not a complete disaster for them. The game isn't in a good place right now, but by drip feeding us updates and pushing out DLC content, Bethesda can no doubt earn back a lot of goodwill, while simultaneously making ludicrous amounts of money, which is always the real goal here. I really wish Starfield could have had a catastrophic launch like Fallout 76, because then Bethesda might have learned some hard lessons by now. It's obvious they didn't take any of the feedback they got from Fallout 4 into consideration when making Starfield. In fact, they pushed further in the wrong direction by relying more on Radiant quests and procedural generation than ever before. Because Starfield is selling well and reviewing decently enough, Bethesda will likely feel free to blow off any criticism once again and repeat all of Starfield's mistakes in The Elder Scrolls 6. So get ready to be disappointed again in 5 or 6 years. Anyways, at this point, there's no way Bethesda can fix most of Starfield's problems. They're a result of bad decisions made near the start of development. All they can do now is triage. They need to focus on improving the most overlooked and broken aspects of the game. Starfield desperately needs more weapon and enemy variety, as well as more locations for the procedural content generator. Performance still needs to be improved too. It is completely unacceptable. Fundamentally though, you can sum up most of Starfield's issues with the title of this video. At every turn, Bethesda chose quantity over quality. The people making these games aren't all idiots. When it came time to decide the scale of the universe, I can guarantee there was more than one voice of reason pointing out the obvious problems with going down the route of creating 1,000 realistically scaled planets. The impassioned arguments of these people no doubt included pointing out the impossibility of creating enough unique art assets to populate 1,000 planets. I'm sure they also pointed out that having 1,000 planets would necessitate the use of fast travel, and I bet they made it clear that for various reasons the engine cannot support massive world spaces and that planets would have to be segmented. These intelligent few were obviously correct in hindsight, but unfortunately their arguments fell on deaf ears. The consequences were disastrous. Like I said in my last video, Starfield needed fewer and smaller planets. I wouldn't mind procedural generation being used in a more limited fashion to speed up the creative process, but the way it ended up, because of Starfield's immense scale, nearly everything had to be procedurally generated. It didn't have to be this way. They didn't need to choose such a large scale. Of course, the whole game couldn't take place on one corner of a planet like Fallout, but they could have chosen to make 20 planets instead of 1,000, and there was no need to make each planet life-sized. In Elder Scrolls lore, Skyrim is larger than the British Isles, but its in-game representation would fit inside the city of London multiple times easily. That's a supermassive discrepancy, but has anyone ever seriously complained about it? As long as the world feels like it's the right size when you're moving through it, there's no problem. By obscuring sightlines and using curved paths and fog, among other things, it's possible to make a small area feel enormous. BGS are masters at this sort of trickery. It's very strange to me that Starfield's cities are tiny, scaled-down miniatures, while the planets themselves are realistically scaled. New Atlantis is a pathetic little speck on the planet of Jemison, which is mostly occupied by undisturbed forests, with the occasional useless facility dotted about, so players have something to stumble upon while making the mistake of aimlessly exploring. These procedurally generated locations can't hold a candle to even the most generic handcrafted locations in Fallout 4. As disappointing as it is that most of the Commonwealth consists of mere shooting galleries, at least every location in Fallout 4 has a reason to exist within the world. For example, Easy City Downs used to be a horse track before the Great War, and later was converted into a robot racing course by raiders and the Triggermen. Disappointingly, there are no quests tied to this location besides Radiant quests, but you can at least understand why this place exists. In Starfield, every location makes no sense. There are solar farms on planets with thick atmospheres and distant orbits. You can find alien skeletons inside caves on lifeless moons. Outdoor barbecues on Inferno planets. It's just an absurd slurry of garbage content. Planets are only the most prominent example of Starfield's quantity over quality mindset. It's all over this damn game. Another great example is during character creation, you can choose one of 21 backgrounds, and of course, with so many backgrounds, none of them matter very much. You might get to reply with some flavor text related to your chosen background every once in a blue moon, but that's the extent of it. Here's a better idea. Instead of having 21 useless backgrounds, have 3 or 4 backgrounds that radically change the game. Instead of starting us off in a boring-ass mine, maybe Bethesda should have taken a page from some of their game's most popular mods and given us multiple starting locations depending on our background. One background could have us start in Neon, another in Aquila City, a third in New Atlantis, and maybe a fourth in Cydonia. That would really add a lot of replay value and make the opening more tolerable. Right now, I'd say Starfield has the weakest intro of any Bethesda game, but a more freeform start where you begin the game on a planet and have to do a few quests to earn enough money to build or buy your first spaceship would transform it into the best introduction ever. Bethesda decided to include way too many game mechanics in Starfield, and many of them are either underused or completely pointless. A great example is ship stealth. It's introduced in one mission near the beginning of the main story, and then it never comes up again. It would have been cool if you could build a small, fast ship with a cloaking device that could slip past enemy ships without fighting, but I don't think that's possible. Most of the time, enemies seem to detect you the instant you grav jump to a location. Ship stealth is this weird one-off mechanic that may as well not have been there. Smuggling, likewise, is pointless. There's no reason to bother with shielded cargo since you can always fast travel to the den and sell your contraband without getting scanned. Because buy and sell prices are the same everywhere, there's no advantage to selling contraband in places where it's illegal. Maybe a supply and demand simulation would be too difficult for Bethesda to implement, but surely a simple price multiplier for contraband items would have been possible. There are already mods that do this, by the way. Environmental damage is a mechanic that can trip you up at the beginning. The average player might assume that radiation, corrosion, heat, and disease are real threats and try to find suits with more environmental protection, but this is completely false. You can explore any planet with any spacesuit, no matter how little protection it has. Conversely, no matter how much protection you have, planets with extreme environments will entirely negate your protection. So it's best to completely ignore these resistances since they don't matter when you need them most, and in any case, the negative status effects you get from the environment are hardly a problem. Often it's more annoying to scroll through your inventory to find the healing item you need to get rid of a negative effect than it is to just live with it. I don't know if that says more about how weak these effects are or how terrible the inventory is, but either way, it's fucked. Speaking of inventory, 90% of the usable items in this game are completely redundant. I've never seen a game with so much item bloat. It's like I'm playing Stalker Misery all over again, but with the worst inventory system ever designed by a human being. I understand they're trying to do world building by having dozens of different types of food, but how the hell am I supposed to hotkey this stuff? There's even 3 different types of med packs. Am I really expected to use up 3 hotkey slots for all of them? If only Bethesda could have learned from their modding community or other games and given us a modern, real-time radial menu to select items from instead of having to go into their god-awful pause menu. In fact, the Constellation Watch is circular. It's the perfect shape for a radial menu. I can't believe they didn't think of this. Space magic powers are also underutilized and horribly implemented. Most of the time I forget I even have them, honestly. Only personal atmosphere gets any regular use out of me. Even if the powers were useful, they wouldn't be worth the horrible tedium of acquiring them. I could barely tolerate the chore of forcing myself to do just one of these temples to get footage for this shitty video. I can't imagine doing all 24 temples and then going through 9 New Game Plus runs to level up all the powers fully. I can't imagine doing this shitty puzzle, collecting space splooge 240 times. Just think about how crazy you'd have to be to do that. I would rather pull 240 individual hairs out of my scrotum. Thinking about it, the entire space magic idea comes totally out of left field. I don't think anybody in the game ever acknowledges you have magic powers besides Constellation members. The temples where you get space magic are often within spitting distance of human settlements, but for some reason nobody except you is bothering to investigate them. One would think that the discovery of mysterious temples not built by humans would be the biggest news story ever, but no one gives a shit. In a world where everyone has thyroid eye disease, there are bigger problems to worry about, I guess. Seriously though, space magic is handled so poorly, it makes me wonder if it was a last-minute addition to the game to try to add some depth to the combat. That would explain why most of the powers are rip-offs of Skyrim's shouts, why the temple minigame is so awful, and why NPCs don't react to you using your powers. Then again, NPCs don't react to you shooting right next to them either, so maybe that's not the smoking gun evidence I think it is. It's funny that this entire game is so lazy and half-assed that I legitimately cannot tell what areas were focused on and what was left unfinished due to time constraints. Maybe there wasn't enough time to flesh out space magic, or maybe they had all the time in the world and this was the best they could come up with. As far as I'm concerned, cybernetic enhancements would have been much more thematically appropriate for a science fiction game, but whatever, I'm done talking about this. You know, I can say a lot of bad things about Fallout 4. The story sucks, dialogue is meaningless, it runs like crap, there's no real choices. I've said all that before. But one area where Bethesda knocked it out of the park is the core kill, loot, return gameplay loop. This loop should be studied by scientists because it's as addictive as crack. Every game mechanic is well tuned to keep you in this 1 hour loop of traversing the world, getting into combat at a location, looting it, and then returning to a settlement to sell your shit, modify your weapons, build a little, and then going out and doing it all over again. The loop can keep you occupied for hours on end. It's so smooth that you don't even realize you're being funneled through it time after time. It's particularly incredible because even if some individual game mechanics don't interest you, for example, I personally don't care for settlement building, there's probably enough other content to keep you in the loop. As long as you find the majority of that content tolerable, Fallout 4 will probably manage to get its hooks into you. All Bethesda had to do with Starfield was copy Fallout 4's gameplay loop and add some more variety to it. But they kneecapped themselves every step of the way. Let me go through the loop and show you how they managed to fuck it up. First off, traversing the game world now takes longer and involves more loading screens and menus, which throws a wrench into the experience. In Fallout 4, you can sprint in just about any direction and you'll find something fun to do. In Starfield, if you do anything other than follow a quest marker, you'll likely end up bored to tears. Combat in Starfield is about on par with Fallout 4, they didn't mess that part up too bad, thankfully. The kill portion of the loop is still intact, it's the loot and return part that they ruined. In Fallout 4, the Carryweight limit exists to naturally guide you back to a settlement where you have an infinite storage box that's connected to all your crafting benches. You get 2 settlements for free right at the start of the game, so every player will have a place to store their stuff, guaranteed. In Starfield, there's no infinite storage anywhere except one magic box in the lodge that the game never tells you about. This might sound like an inconsequential change, but it actually heavily disrupts the flow of the game. Instead of being a gentle push that makes you switch up what you're doing, Starfield's weight limit is more likely to frustrate players because once their inventory and ship hold is full, there's nothing they can do except drop stuff on the ground or sell it to vendors that don't have enough credits. It adds a layer of annoying inventory management that didn't need to be there. Outposts are difficult to get into, and there's this weird buggy cargo link mechanic that's not explained. I already didn't like base building in Fallout 4, and its inferior incarnation in Starfield turned me off instantly as soon as I touched it. Even weapon modding is ruined. In Fallout 4, Bethesda smartly made early game weapons easy to modify. Pipe weapons in particular have few perk requirements and low material requirements. This gets basically every player involved in weapon modding right from the get-go. In Starfield, you're cock-blocked because you need to do research before you even get to the fun part of modifying weapons. Why the hell do I need to research what a laser sight is? Shouldn't the manufacturers of these weapons have done that? Come to think of it, why do I have to build weapon mods myself? That makes sense in a post-apocalyptic world, but in Starfield's universe, surely there's a gun store somewhere that could install the mods for me. At least in Fallout 4, if you didn't want to invest in the gun nut or science perks, you could take mods off of enemy weapons or weapons bought from vendors. It's cumbersome to do because you have to waste resources crafting a standard weapon part to get the superior part you want. It's actually very confusing at first and the game doesn't explain it, but that's still better than not being able to switch mods at all in Starfield. Most Starfield players are going to waste their time and resources upgrading a calibrated weapon with crappy legendary effects. And when they get something better, they'll realize it was all for nothing because they have to do it all over again. The natural evolution of weapon modding would be to let us swap out mods on the fly like Crysis did 16 years ago. Seriously, why the hell do I have to find a workbench to take off a silencer or add a scope to my gun? It would be so easy to improve on this system, but no. Instead of improving on Fallout 4, Starfield makes all the same mistakes and then some. Starfield feels like it was made by a dozen different teams that weren't on speaking terms with each other, and when it came time to assemble the final game, they failed to glue their disparate mechanics together properly. See, if you could craft shipbuilding components at your outposts, that would link outpost building to shipbuilding. But you can't. These two systems have absolutely nothing to do with each other. They might as well be two separate games. I've realized that's what playing Starfield is like. It's as if you're constantly swapping between half a dozen shitty games from different genres. Every Bethesda game is like that to some extent. Without exception, they're meant to be jack-of-all-trades style games, but in the past, the whole felt greater than the sum of each admittedly mediocre part. But with Starfield, the parts aren't even connected to each other. I think Starfield's ruined gameplay loop is what people are really experiencing when they say this game feels disconnected and disjointed. The loading screens tend to get the blame, but they're only part of the problem. Nevertheless, I'm going to end this video by going on a tangent about loading screens anyways, even though it really doesn't fit my central thesis of quantity over quality. I just want to bash on Starfield a little more before we finish here, and can you blame me? I don't know how Bethesda thought they could get away with this many loading screens in 2023. Make no mistake, Bethesda knew that loading screens were a huge problem. That's why they edited them out of pre-release footage. If only they had put in the effort to edit them out of the actual game. Look, I'm not totally unreasonable. I can understand needing loading screens in between space and a planet's surface, or for extremely large interior areas, but why the hell does this tiny shop in New Atlantis need to be its own cell? I don't get it. Some of these loading screens seem to be even more unnecessary than that. For example, every time you enter or exit your ship, there's a loading screen. But when your ship lands, the entire surrounding area is already loaded. You can see buildings and NPCs outside your cockpit, and you can even no-clip outside, no loading screen needed. Although when you do this, the game tries to push you back into your ship, and you'll fall through the ground if you stop no-clipping. I don't know what the hell is going on here. The same is the case for the train in New Atlantis. You can sprint and jetpack your way around each district with no loading screen, so why does catching the train require a loading screen? It doesn't make much sense. If anyone knows the technical reason why these particular loading screens are necessary, I'd love to hear it, because knowing Bethesda, it's bound to be something incredibly stupid. Defenders of this game always fall back on one point when people rightfully complain about loading screens. They say it's understandable because Starfield has this one feature other games don't have: object persistence. Basically, you can dump a bunch of garbage in a room and it will stay there. To that stupid argument, I have two responses. First off, Bethesda games have had physics object persistence since Oblivion, and Oblivion had loading screens for entering every house, every city, and every dungeon. That was on the Xbox 360. 2 console generations later, we have Starfield, with essentially the same crappy physics as Oblivion, and it still has tons of loading screens. Am I seriously supposed to believe that we're still facing the same hardware limitations as back then? No way. The problem lies not with hardware, but rather Bethesda's dated engine and their misuse of it. Second, even if I was to accept that the Xbox Series X and modern PCs are just as incapable as the Xbox 360 and a Core 2 Duo machine, if the permanence of physics objects really is the reason for why Starfield's universe needed to be severely segmented, any competent developer would have removed this feature 5 goddamn games ago. Seriously, who in their right mind would choose to make a game full of loading screens because of a bunch of useless physics objects when they could have made a game with no loading screens at all? At least in Fallout 4, junk items could be scrapped into raw materials. In Starfield, that's no longer the case. Literally nothing about Starfield's gameplay would change if the objects you drop or move got deleted or reset respectively every few hours. Object persistence doesn't even make sense most of the time. If I drop a bunch of junk at a restaurant, it shouldn't be there if I come back a week later. Logically, someone would have cleaned it up. Seeing everything still be on the floor shatters my immersion rather than enhances it. The lengths some people will go to defend Bethesda's terrible design decisions always leaves me speechless. I'm done talking about this game for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it meandered and kind of went nowhere. There were other ideas I wanted to touch on, like Starfield's universe being too generic and derivative, and its world building being awful, but time is always my enemy when making these videos, so I'll have to save that for later. On an unrelated note, soon I'll be doing a mod battle video about various total conversions for Fallout 4. I'm covering Frost, Horizon, the Wars mod that came out a few months ago, maybe some other ones. Give me suggestions in the comments. I'll try to get that video out by the end of this month if I can, so stay tuned for that. But for now, toodles everybody! I'm only $1,900 in the hole thanks to this channel. Financial genius.